First, some context. I was dating my now husband, and he lived around a 40-minute drive from me. The area I lived in was a well-populated suburb, whereas he lived in essentially the middle of nowhere. After the 2 gas stations off the rarely used highway exit, it was 10 minutes of farmland with maybe 5 random farmhouses along the way. On the night of this story, I had gotten off work late and decided to go spend the night with future husband. I had been on the highway for maybe 5 minutes when a gold pickup truck started driving next to me. At first I didn't really think anything of it, but then he just stayed there. Directly beside me, on a mostly empty 3-lane highway. Weird. Once I realized it was strange, I looked over at the truck more purposefully, and the man driving was waving at me like he wanted to say hi. So I made a sort of WTF? Face, gave a feeble wave back, and then eyes back on the road. I then slowed down to try to break pace with him, but he slowed down too, then started waving more in a way like he wanted me to pull over. I ignored him and sped up again. He then started alternated between tailgating in the same lane, then driving beside me again and trying to get my attention. Tailgating, beside, tailgating, beside. He did this probably 6 times. So it's time for me to exit, and the next exit isn't for another 20 minutes down the road, plus I wouldn't know how to get where I'm going from there. So I decide to take my proper exit and hope for the best. Gold truck follows me. Crap. There were 2 lanes on the frontage road for a while, and he drove beside me. When it came time to merge to 1 lane, I waited until the last minute, then quickly braked, which he wasn't expecting, forcing him into the lead position, meaning he was no longer following me. I thought at that point I'd be able to make a quick turn to get fully away, but there weren't any turns for a mile or 2, and he pulled into the first gas station, waited for me to drive past, then immediately got back on the road behind me. So it's kind of down to the wire for me to decide what to do before I'm on a dark country road with no lights and no help. I decided to call his bluff, but in a way that I felt at least somewhat safe. I pulled into the second gas station and parked as close to the convenience store as I could. He parked next to me. I gave him the most psychotic angry face I could force, rolled my window down just a crack so he could hear me, and screamed at him to stop freaking following me or I was going to call the cops. He just smiled at me and didn't say anything or leave. So I called the cops as promised. He left before the police arrived, but I gave them his plates and description. Nothing ever came of it, of course, and the cops gave the lame excuse that when they ran the plates it showed that he works in the next town over, so maybe he really did need to take the same exit. Which obviously explains all of his other strange behavior. I live in a small rural community in the eastern US. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent, and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department and a couple blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose? My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to me, most people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I did not attend because it's just not my thing. Plus I have a dog and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar large, white pickup drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks because they don't want or are unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually, it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large, black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling, rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling. So I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags. He took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was, but eventually he got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. "Crap," he hissed under his breath. "What?" I asked. "It's a body." I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate, or of the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames, the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details, like I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public. I don't know if the coroner has even been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know he could dump there? He probably thought it'd get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me feel physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice. Their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it might just happen again to another poor soul. I hope it's not me.